Good evening, listeners. It's time to settle in for another chilling story of suburban suspense. From the slumbering heads of Mount Rushmore to the twin and windy cities. From the unseen depths of the Great Lakes to the rustling husks of cornfields across the heartland. Who knows what ghouls and crawling creatures lurk among us under the Midwest moon? Every rooftop and coffee shop is suspect here on Monstrous Midwest.
Adam had to get out. 5 years manning the security checkpoint at the airport left him spent, slouching home each evening and slumping onto the couch, avoiding eye contact with his dog Brando, who lay like a dejected throw pillow on the floor beside him. Ironically, exhausted as he was, Adam usually felt so overstimulated from work he couldn't fall asleep. Instead, he would stare, bleary-eyed at his laptop, as another late-night sitcom binged itself. Enough. This wasn't him. He gave his notice at the airport and, not 1 week later, came across an opening for an overnight position at a brewery downtown. Perfect. Something independent and quiet. No jostling crowds or irate demands. No boarding passes waved in his face by travelers running behind schedule. Working nights would also give him the day to spend at home with Brando. It was ideal. He wasn't that knowledgeable about beer or the brewing process. The closest he came was sampling his sister's microbrew creations, humoring her by rolling them in his mouth and pretending to taste the notes of pumpkin or coffee. But Adam was a quick study. Though he hadn't visited this particular brewery yet, he knew from friends that it had a relaxed atmosphere and a friendly staff. Coupled with the chance to work alone, these endorsements were all he needed. Adam's interview with the hiring manager was brief. She gave him a condensed rundown of job duties and asked just one question. When was he prepared to start? After a quick offer and even quicker acceptance, Adam started orientation with Miguel, the employee whose position he would fill. Orientation was when the real learning came. Adam was surprised to find out that the brewery wasn't strictly beer. The brew house was both a bar and a coffee house, offering specialty hot drinks during the day and serving up local craft brews at night. The brewery was housed on one end of a horseshoe-shaped building that shared space with a handful of restaurants and boutiques downtown. The business was new, still within its first year, and Miguel told Adam how the staff had experienced a surprising number of accidents in that time. Burst bottles and missing shipments, an electrical fire and collapsed awning on the same day. So many accidents cropped up that the employees had invented a scapegoat they could blame for all the mishaps that struck the store, a clumsy monster with a taste for hops. The team affectionately nicknamed the imaginary beast the Hobgobbler. Whenever a glass slipped and shattered or the storeroom door inexplicably locked behind someone, everyone would joke, "The Hobgobbler strikes again." They pictured him, hairy like a Sasquatch, but compact, with slightly more sinister features, a quick-limbed composite of a yeti and a goblin. Adam listened to all this with interest, smiling at the idea and appreciating what he thought was Miguel's attempt to put him at ease, to let him know what a fun, laid-back team he was joining. Following orientation, Adam spent a few nights shadowing Miguel. He familiarized himself with the equipment and took notes as he followed Miguel through his routine, being careful to jot down his exact techniques. Adam drew a diagram in his notebook to remember where different supplies were housed and asked any questions that came to mind, trying to anticipate what he might need to know once he was on his own. He dreaded having to make a midnight call and waking up a coworker to get an easy question answered. Adam's first week passed quickly, and quietly. The quiet was almost unnatural, considering the brewery stood in the center of the city's more boisterous hotspots. If downtown were a house party, this neighborhood would be the crowded kitchen. Because of this, Adam couldn't help but find the silence a little unsettling. Eager as he was to escape all the noise and commotion of his last job, this quiet was strange, expectant, like a sudden silence in a horror movie score. One night, Adam was so stupefied by the quiet that he worried he had somehow suffered hearing loss. He tapped his palms against his ears and hurried to the back alley to gulp down some cold air and steady himself. The din of traffic and glass bottles clattering into a dumpster assured him all was normal, and he felt embarrassed for having panicked. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Unnerved as he was, however, Adam would have gladly taken the eerie quiet over what was soon to come. After a week of training on a drizzly Friday night, Miguel gave Adam the go-ahead to fly solo. Adam stared at the empty stools beside the bar, feeling strangely anxious at the thought. Miguel clapped him on the back and wished him luck. As he did so, Adam caught the briefest shadow of emotion pass over Miguel's face, a flash of cold, unvarnished fear, and it sent Adam's stomach rolling as he locked the door behind Miguel. Hoping to shake off his uneasiness, he got to work right away, running through his start-of-shift checklist. His first task was closing down the front of the house, which meant locking the front door and turning off all the overhead fluorescents, leaving only the neon business sign to cast an electric green pallor over the room. Keeping the bar dark worked well to discourage late-night revelers from visiting past close, but the green-rimmed shadows in the room did nothing to ease Adam's anxiety. Thankfully, the bulk of Adam's work happened back in the production room. He gave a quick tidying to the pool table and the shelf of mugs beside the register before turning out the lights and heading back to finish mashing the current batch. Adam raised the mash's heat, keeping a close eye on the thermometer. He paused the mash at 113 degrees, then 144, then 163, following Miguel's instructions. Before straining the mash, he had to raise the temperature of the vessel once more, 172 degrees, according to his notes. Adam watched the needle of the thermometer slowly climb to 166, 167, 168. Then suddenly, crack! He spun around at the sound of billiard balls breaking, clacking against each other and clattering to the ground. Adam raced to the front of the house to see balls still rolling across the floor. He scanned the dim room for Miguel, or a customer, who could have gotten in somehow. Finding no one, Adam peered out of one of the tall picture windows, hoping to catch a teenage prankster running away, but all he saw was his own fear-stricken face, and the electric brightness of the neon sign reflected back in the dark. He moved to the door and gave it a hard tug, confirming that it was securely locked. Rather than put him at ease, this troubled him more. He suddenly remembered his co-worker Emily claiming she'd seen pucks gliding on their own across the shuffleboard one night. Adam had laughed then, disbelieving, but now the story chilled him. Adam stooped to collect the billiard balls and return them to the table, trying his best to replace everything before he had a chance to scare himself. He quickly arranged the balls in their triangle rack and straightened the cue sticks. All was in place, except the cue ball was missing. He crouched to look for it under the stools and the fridge, then back behind the massive potted plant beside the door. Nowhere. Finally, he laid himself flat on the floor, the cold of the concrete seeping through his shirt and pants. His eyes swept over the range of chair and table legs before he spotted it against the wall beside the bar, the shiny white sphere, tinted green beneath the neon sign. He pushed himself up and moved to retrieve it, but just as he reached out for it, he heard a low, mean growl ripple from the shadows behind the bar. Not the frightened or territorial growl of a dog, but throatier and sustained. A thrill of fear surged through him. He snatched his hand back and retreated several steps before sprinting to the safety and light of the production room, his heart in his throat. He hunched over, hands on his knees, working hard to slow his breathing. Adam knew he could be susceptible to scary stories, but he hadn't realized how much Miguel's talk of the hobgobbler had shaken him. Sure, he hadn't imagined it, but too spooked to investigate. He spent the rest of the night working distractedly, forcing his thoughts again and again away from the bar and back to his checklist. Adam was still reeling when the morning shift employees arrived at 5 a.m. He pulled Emily aside to tell her what had happened. Apart from Miguel, Emily had been the only other coworker Adam had really talked to yet, and she struck him as a sympathetic ear. He hadn't seen anything, he explained, but he was certain of what he heard. Even more so, what he had felt. A double-edged stab of dread and foreboding at that growl. "You're telling me you're afraid of this little guy?" Emily laughed good-naturedly, tossing him a can with an illustrated monster on the front. Recently, the team had designed a caricature of the hobgobbler, adding him to the label of their seasonal stout series, a funky little mascot surrounded by technicolor trees and mountains. It was their way of including customers in on the joke. The stacked cans in the glass front fridge gave the impression of a whole forest of beasts, all smiling and waving from their frosty cave. Adam thought the doodle was sweet, unthreatening. Nothing like the real thing. Wait, the real thing? What was he thinking? Adam returned the can to its display and chastised himself for letting his fear overtake his reasoning. He told Emily to forget it. He was still adjusting to working nights and had gotten a little spooked. That's all. He had to get a grip before the team started questioning why they had hired him. Who but a little kid takes monster jokes seriously? Surely there had been some easy explanation for what had happened last night, some obvious answer that his sleep-deprived mind was too clouded to see. Of course the hobgobbler wasn't real, but that growl. All day, the memory of that growl rode like a buoy on the surface of his churning thoughts. Once home, he leashed up Brando for a walk around the neighborhood, hoping a brisk trip in the cold would clear his head. No luck. Adam recoiled at the rumble of an idling car and jumped when Brando snarled at a passing retriever. On the return trek, he overshot his house by 2 blocks out of distraction, only realizing his mistake because of Brando's persistent straining. Back inside, he retreated to his bedroom and closed the curtains against the mid-morning sun. A friend who worked the graveyard shift at a hospital had given Adam day-blind shades to help him sleep, but he lay awake for hours, wide-eyed and restless in the pitch black. Rather than settle his mind, the darkness gave his imagination an easier canvas. He pictured the hobgobbler's eyes and quick hands, and he wondered at the monster's speed. Mostly, though, he considered the name his coworkers had come up with. The hobgobbler didn't fit, he thought. That name was far too cutesy for what Adam felt prowled the brewery that night. He had the sense the creature was much more sinister. The Growler. That's what Adam would have named it. The Growler had more weight to it, a scarier edge. It also spoke to the aspect of the monster that most frightened him. That deep, guttural sound that he could feel even now resonating in his sternum. Finally giving up on sleep, Adam shuffled to the kitchen to cook. But after burning 2 omelets and scalding his hand on a pizza stone, he abandoned that too. He resigned to pacing around the house and half-heartedly cleaning until his second shift crept closer. Adam's strategy for tackling tonight's shift was distraction. He planned to start his night by chatting with Leroy, the owner of the Cajun restaurant next to the brew house. Sharing some small talk might help ease his nerves, get him out of his head. The restaurant was typically popular right up until close, and fortunately for Adam, Leroy often stayed late most nights. This gave Adam a sense of company for a little while longer, shortened the time he was alone in the building. Adam had been introduced to Leroy during training, and tonight, when Adam heard Leroy pulling down the restaurant's clanking security grate, he headed over to strike up a conversation. "You taking off, Leroy?" Adam called out as he rounded the corner. He stopped short. The lights were out, the grate fully down, and nobody in sight. No Leroy, no straggling customers. Nothing and no one to explain the grate's rattling. Fear resumed its grip. Adam searched the common area that joined the restaurant and the brewery and looked out through the wall of windows facing the courtyard. Frosty bushes and ferns sparkled in the streetlights as sleet lashed against the glass. He stood that way for several moments, peering out the window at the empty courtyard until his heart rate settled back down. Let it go, he told himself. Still agitated, he returned to the production room to start his shift. Thankfully, Adam found a rhythm and was quickly absorbed in his routine, adding grain to a vat of water to steep and moving the wort of another batch to a kettle of hops to boil. Not 20 minutes passed, however, before a noise jolted him from his work. He paused to listen more closely. It was the sound of bare feet slapping against concrete. The quick footsteps ran the length of the room and then quieted, overtaken by a deafening torrent of bangs against the copper vat beside him. Just then, the brewery's signature sweet, yeasty smell turned acrid, thick and sickly pungent. That's when he heard it again, that terrifying growl, louder and harsher than the first time. It came from behind the cluster of fermentation tanks. Adam fought every instinct he had and stayed rooted to the spot, trembling but determined to confront the monster. He drew a ragged breath and took a step, silently, toward the tanks, craning to the side for a better view. There, in the reflection of one of the towering cylinders, Adam saw a distorted shape, a dark form, low to the ground. It was larger than a raccoon, with black eyes and matted hair covering its whole body. Its back heaved in rhythm with its growling. The reflection made it difficult to see specific features, and as Adam leaned in closer, focusing his eyes to make better sense of what he saw, the growling stopped. Adam straightened, startled. A half-breath later, the creature lunged at him. Adam scrambled backwards, nearly falling, then raced through the short row of equipment and threw open the door to the front of the house. He slammed it shut behind him and fumbled to wedge a broomstick through its handles, but couldn't manage it in his hurry. Quickly, he ducked behind the bar and crouched low among the crates of drinks and napkins. He strained to hear the creature approach over his shallow breathing. There was nothing. No more footsteps. No door swinging open. The low growl continued, but Adam couldn't tell if he was hearing it or remembering it. He forced his breathing under control and considered his next move. Just then, the neon sign hanging above him began to buzz as the tubes flared with triple intensity. Adam watched the sign grow brighter and impossibly brighter until it burst like a thermometer in a cartoon. Glass rained down on him where he crouched, leaving him in pitch blackness. He brushed slivers of the falling glass from his hair and sweater before darting out from behind the bar. He felt his way along the wall, knocking over a framed photograph and sending a tray of pint glasses to the floor. The growl grew louder and more ragged. It sounded as if it surrounded him. Adam pushed aside chairs as he sprinted blindly for the courtyard door. Locked. He forced the door once, a second time, and again with all of his strength before it gave. He fled outside, scrambling through the bushes in the courtyard and running across the street to the sheltered doorway on the other side. Breathless, he turned to look back at the brewery, feeling as though he'd just escaped a flaming building. Strangely, the brew house sat quietly, giving away nothing of the terror that had just played out inside. Adam felt the exact sensation he'd experienced once as a child at the carnival, emerging from a haunted funhouse in a cold sweat, to find everyone else laughing and swinging bags of cotton candy, carrying on as though he hadn't just survived a living nightmare. Feeling as if his legs might give out, Adam sat down on the slushy curb. His sweater and jeans were soaked through with sleet, and his body shook, adrenaline spent. He pulled his phone from his pocket and sent a resignation email to his boss right then, apologizing but insisting that he was done. He would pay for any damages, but he would not work another night. The next day, Adam stood on the sidewalk in front of the brewery door, grimacing at his reflection in the sun-streaked glass. Dread settled over him like a lead vest when he pushed the door open. His boss greeted him with a nod. "I have some paperwork for you, if you'll give me just a minute. Why don't you have a seat? Grab a drink," his boss said, and ducked back into the office. Adam took a steadying breath and chose the stool closest to the door. Someone had swept up the broken glass from the burst neon sign and unplugged it and unmounted the frame above the bar. In its place hung a makeshift replacement, a vinyl banner with the greeting, "Welcome to the Brew House," printed on it, likely from the brewery's grand opening. Adam wondered who had to dig that sign out from storage and imagined how upset they must have been at the mess he'd left behind. What would his co-workers think of him quitting like this? Would any of them believe him? The previous night's terror now seemed unreal in the afternoon light, an unlikely fever dream. He swiveled on his stool to see a houseplant swaying under the heating vent and a pair of girls studying beside the window, with Leon Bridges crooning from the speakers and the smell of hops and rich coffee mixing. He suddenly questioned the whole experience, doubted himself entirely. Had he reached the hallucination stage of sleep deprivation last night? Did that explain it? A barista appeared in the supply room and asked what he wanted to drink. "It's the magic hour. Our coffee and beer menus are both available," she told him. He studied the menu board behind her, not in the mood for anything. He was about to say as much when, suddenly, the smell of the percolating house blend turned sharp and acidic, like an aura that warns of a coming fainting spell. He braced his arms against the counter and worked to focus his eyes on the barista, trying desperately to ward off what he feared would follow. That's when he heard a low, rumbling snarl beneath the spurts of the steamer and whir of the grinders. No, he shook his head. That wasn't real. Too much caffeine and not enough sleep had his imagination and adrenaline double-teaming him. The barista repeated her question. I'm okay. I don't need anything," he sputtered. "Growler?" His heart stopped. "What?" he asked. "I can fill a growler for you if you'd rather take something home." "Oh," he said, and laughed nervously, relieved by the misunderstanding, his fear over nothing. Sure. What do you recommend?" "The Hobgobbler," she said. "Very dark, very strong. It definitely stays with you."
You've been listening to Monstrous Midwest Radio Theater. We hope you'll join us soon for more spooky thrills, right here under the Midwest moon.